Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Could you talk about adult friendship and what makes friendships distinct from other kinds of relationships that we have?
In every tradition that I know of, the Western philosophical tradition, all of the religious traditions from Asia, all the different parts of Asia, all have profound discourses on meditations on friendship. In my life, I've been aware of friendship as something very special and somehow related to God since I was a teenager. And I started writing poems to someone I called the friend. And it's interesting like that you say a distinction between a romance and an adult friendship, because when I was 13 or 14, when I started writing these poems to someone I called the friend, I had this idea, I don't know where it came from, but this idea that there was some kind of relationship that was different from all of the other relationships that I had, that was less limited, that was more free, where nothing needed to be held back and anything could be expressed. And I called that the friend. So even though I had ordinary friends, and I wouldn't exactly say I had romances at the age of 13 or 14, I mean, I had crushes on people. I guess it was the start of some kind of romantic life. None of that felt satisfying to me. It's almost like I had this imaginary friend that I was writing to. The impetus for these poems was the feeling that, which was a very prominent feeling in my childhood, and I'm not saying everybody feels this, but this feeling that only a small amount of what I wanted to communicate could be communicated. And that somehow I needed this other kind of relationship to be able to do that, be able to communicate fully. Now I understand and know that there's a whole set of discourses around friendship and the friend that call God the friend, or call Guru the friend, and that this is really what I was longing for. This sort of no holds barred relationship that was based in beneficence. I couldn't have said that then. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I had a feeling of yearning. There are aspects of that relationship with Guru or God which I think are part of the whole Western and Eastern philosophical traditions, secular traditions, of discussions around friendship, and basically the elevation of friendship as the highest form of relationship above all others, especially in the Taoist tradition and the European philosophical traditions. Friendship is elevated above all other relationships. And I think it's because friendship is a relationship where there's nothing to prove, nothing to lose or gain, where you can say nothing or anything. Many of the discourses on friendship extol the ability to remain silent in the presence of the friend, but yet have a feeling of open communication even when nothing is being verbalized. My friend Lu Ming had a large blow-up photograph of an ink and pen drawing from the Taoist tradition, and it was a picture of two Taoist fellows in their Taoist outfits, sometime in ancient times, sitting on a mountainside overlooking a great vista, not even turned toward each other, just sitting next to each other and looking out, almost a little bit even in different directions, and not saying anything. Ming told me that he felt what this drawing was portraying was the highest, or the most full relationship he could imagine, where you would just sit and enjoy a big view in the presence of another and nothing needed to be said. But yet, space itself was full and pregnant with the bonds and love of that friendship. Do you understand?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that is somehow woven into human life, this notion of friendship. Now, I will say that obviously we have all kinds of ideas about romantic relationships that are different than that. In human history and in different cultures, romance has really come in and out of favor. I mean, romance is not the same thing across all cultures and at all times in history. Sometimes it's considered to be very important. Sometimes it's considered to be almost irrelevant. Sometimes the romances that are between male equals are considered to be more important than those between husbands and wives. There's many, many permutations of kind of what counts as romance. But certainly sometimes it's utilitarian. Sometimes it's impassioned. Sometimes it's pretty fraught and twisted, depending on what it is. But it doesn't have that feeling of nothing left to do that friendship does. Toni Morrison, who wrote Beloved, she wrote another book, the name of which I can't remember, but basically it's about two women friends and how that relationship, through all trials and tribulations, endures beyond all other relationships. I think that's also a part of friendship, that romance comes and goes, it cools and heats up and cools again. But that friendship, even when friends are estranged, never really ends and can always be resurrected. Or that somehow friendship has this enduring quality that romance does not necessarily have. In every culture that I'm familiar with, friendship is actually something that's more reliable than romance and more valuable, just more valuable than romance. And I think that's also not true in all cultures and all times and spaces. It's certainly not true at all ages. If you grow up in this culture and you're of a certain ilk, you're trained to think that finding a romantic partner is the be-all and the end-all. Maybe you'll think that when you're 14 or 15 or 16, but you might not think that when you're 40. You might not still believe in that when you're 40. The other thing I would say is that the more realization you have, the less difference there is between friendship and romance. In terms of romance being like a special passion that you have for a single person or a few people, that whole construct becomes uninteresting and at some point just impossible to even feel, because you have, first of all, more of a feeling of equal affection for everyone. And you're not really, well, speaking for myself, I'm not interested in cultivating romance. It just seems the opposite of the direction that I'm going in. And you could say that having experienced more of the nature of the self, the nature of reality, that there's a kind of a romance with everything. So it's not like romance dies and you get some bland thing, because people think life without romance is bland. That may or may not be true. But there is a kind of romance or magic in one's relationship with everyone that might not have been there before. And I certainly feel that about teacher-student relationships, but not exclusively about teacher-student relationships. That there's often just some feeling of charge or excitement when it's working well that is like romance in some way or another. Not exactly like romance, but has some sort of electricity like that.
I went and visited a really old friend from high school. I've known her for 25 years now. And it was a really difficult trip. We were just talking a lot about how once you're friends, you just stay friends. Like, just anything goes. You've just made a commitment to this person. This sort of openness to who they are and how they show up that I don't find in other relationships was an interesting thing to feel when it is hard, but I'm still willing to go and wanting to go and be there and be part of their life.
Yeah, I think that's characteristic of a lot of writings about and experiences of friendship, that even when there's estrangement or difficulty, the actual existence of the friendship is not questioned. There's a lack of questioning the existence of it, which is really relaxing, right? Gives everybody a chance to express themselves or to come and go even.
I think there's just like a deepness to it. I mean, I've been in a relationship with these women for longer than most, even like my marriage or my children.
Lots of people, and especially lots of women, have spoken about that and noticed that and drawn nourishment from that. And then if you think about your relationship with God or your relationship with Guru, it's like that 100 times, incontrovertible, no matter what happens.
That like makes me want to cry. That's so sweet.
Sometimes if students are newish, there'll be something that some juncture that we get to, and they'll say they're worried about me leaving them or abandoning them or something like that. And to me, that's just like jaw-droppingly not understanding what's going on. I understand where that's coming from in people because that's their relationship to everything. They're always worried about being abandoned by everything. So they just port that right over to the teacher. That makes perfect sense. But in point of fact, the student is much more likely to abandon the teacher than the teacher to abandon the student. Once an actual connection like that has been made, it's not really possible for the teacher to completely divorce themselves from the student. And there's always going to be an open door. That's just natural law.
I have a friendship question, maybe about sensitivity. Also, as I'm becoming more sensitive, I can feel someone's resentment, or I can feel that they're not sane. It's tiring. I have good relationships where I don't feel that, so I think it's becoming more poignant when I do. Like, oh wow, I really feel that coming towards me.
You know, unless you have a regular, pervasive pattern of always thinking people are directing negativity at you, if that were the case, that's a realm projection. But if you're just perceiving more and perceiving more intensely other people's condition, you're also perceiving just things that are happening for them and with them that don't have anything to do with you. It's not all focused on you. You have to examine your perceptions to see, is this an emotional pattern where the only thing I'm really perceiving is stuff directed at me that's bothering me? Or am I actually perceiving in the broader spectrum more about other people's condition? Because perceiving more in a broad spectrum is something to be welcomed. And it can be very intense, absolutely. The idea is that if it is an enhanced perception, you want to become acclimatized to it. Certainly what we're doing here is trying to open the gates of our perception. And every time we make a somewhat significant move in that direction, there is very often a period where it feels uncomfortable, and we have to sort of take it in and begin to try to digest it and make our sensorium actually capable of holding those new perceptions. The beautiful thing about those perceptions about other people is that they're useful. When you really feel and see and know how other people are, you can be much more skillful in relating to them. I have this happen to me all the time. I'll say to somebody, oh, you seem angry. I'm not angry. And then, 6 months later, they're like, wow, I'm just angry all the time. Sometimes you might be perceiving things that other people aren't even perceiving yet or able to feel about themselves. And it takes a lot of sensitivity and skill to know when to keep talking about it, when to shut up and just wait for them to come to it on their own. But this is all part of the practice that we're doing anyway. It will open up your perceptions. It will cause you to feel what other people are feeling more. And that will become a very useful way of navigating life and navigating your relationships with people and developing more skill. When you can see that someone is very angry, but that just underneath that surface is sadness and grief, you can have a completely different relationship in that moment with that person. But if all you see is the anger and you feel it's somehow too harsh for you, or they shouldn't be angry, or you have all these other more superficial narratives going on, then you're much less skillful in dealing with them. You try to talk them out of being angry, or you get angry at them being angry, or you go into some fragility histrionics because they're angry. All those things are not helpful to anybody. But if you're being more skillful and you sense the moment is there, sometimes in that you can just put your hand on somebody's arm and they'll start feeling what's underneath their anger. Or you can say a little word or something. And then you're much, much more skillful. But you have to be able to hold those things and not be blocking them out. So don't worry if it's a little uncomfortable. If you keep kind of inhaling it, you'll eventually be able to hold it. People have a lot of behaviors and a lot of feelings that are just easier to feel and do than the thing that's underneath it, dealing with the thing that's underneath it. When people are behaving in certain ways too that are not so great, being able to see more deeply into that is very, very helpful. But then you're stuck feeling it, and then you're also stuck now and then with someone just absolutely 100% denying that your perceptions are real. My modus operandi has always been to just back off at that point. But that can also be kind of destabilizing. One thing I realized, because I've had these kind of perceptions of people since I was very small, is that when people are not perceiving what I'm perceiving, yet I'm perceiving it so clearly that there's no way I'm not going to be perceiving it no matter what anybody says. I just am like, those are my perceptions. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't say that to other people. I mean, I say it to myself. Right or wrong, that's my perception. I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to abandon myself. It'll either turn out right or wrong in the long run. But it's helpful to recognize that if you have a very strong perception, that is your perception in the moment, right or wrong.
Thinking about friendships, I had a friendship with a work colleague that kind of fell apart last year. Recently, she just stopped in my office and said something very general, like, I don't want things to be weird between us anymore. And I was kind of like, okay. I don't know. I have really good friends, and I feel like one of the key things is it's someone you can really depend on. And when I really needed to depend on her, she repeatedly showed that I couldn't actually depend on her. So there's part of me that's just like, if she wants to make the effort, then I'm willing to repair, but I just don't want to put the energy into it myself.
That's interesting, because some relationships we have with people are really in their formative stages. They're pretty new in a sense. They could have been around for years, but there's still some areas that have not been explored and that make those relationships not what they seem. We have these relationships, and sometimes we have extremely warm feelings toward people and feel we really love them and we're really close. But a lot of that is based on not knowing certain things. And then we get into some new circumstance with that person where something is tested, where we find out what the ground of that relationship really is. If it turns out that that person cannot be there for us in those moments, I mean, this happens to all of us. This is a pretty common experience. Our feelings change. We become much more sober about that relationship. And then we have to decide if we actually want to keep going with it or not, or whether we just want to let it be superficial or even walk away. So for the person who is experiencing this letdown and sobering process, even for that person, it's very sad. It's a loss of fantasy. It's a loss of companionship, even though you suddenly realize it wasn't exactly the intimacy you thought it was. And it might not have anything to do with you. I mean, most likely it has nothing to do with you. Most likely it's just this person's incapacity. And then you get left with this decision about whether you want to be friends and how you want to be friends with someone who has that incapacity and who you know is not going to be there for you down the road if something happens again. I think for you, maybe it's just kind of finishing that reckoning process you seem to still have a question about whether it's worth it. Let's be sober too. I still feel like there's a little lack of sobriety there. Because if someone came by my office and just said, I don't want things to be weird between us, that doesn't feel like an overture of friendship or reconciliation to me. That just sounds like I just don't want to be uncomfortable at work, you know. And really actually quite uncaring. I think maybe time to complete the morning and move on. Things won't be weird if you complete the morning. Friendship's such a great topic. I always love talking about friendship. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.